The Germans were aware that the Allies might launch a large-scale amphibious operations sometime in summer 1942. In Führer Order No. 40 issued in March 1942, Adolf Hitler had instructed his generals to assume that any Allied attempt to capture a French port city was the start of an invasion and to react accordingly. In June 1942, the Wehrmacht had launched an offensive designed to capture the Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus. And thereby win the war against the Soviet Union. Believing that he was on the brink of victory on the Eastern Front, Hitler was convinced that Anglo-American forces would attempt an invasion of France in the summer of 1942. In a desperate bid to save the Soviet Union from defeat, and accordingly Hitler had ordered Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt to prepare for the expected invasion, on the basis of the information he had. Rundstedt believed that a major raid or even an invasion of France would be attempted in the summer of 1942, which led him to put his forces on the highest state of alert. Rundstedt believed that the most likely landing places were the French ports, which served as bases for the Kriegsmarine submarines. It was German policy to send the best units of the Wehrmacht to fight on the Eastern Front in 1941 to 1942, and most of the divisions in France in 1942 were lesser units considered unfit to fight on the Eastern Front or were once higher quality units that had been so mauled on the Eastern Front that they had been sent to France to serve as a cadre to rebuild the shattered divisions. The 302nd Infantry Division, which held Dieppe in August 1942, was a low-quality division formed in Bavaria in October 1940. After completing its training in the Reich, the 302nd Infantry Division had been sent to France in April 1941, where it had taken up its positions in the Dieppe area. Or so men who served in the 302nd Division were older men judged unfit to serve on the Eastern Front, and the division had suffered from a continuing shortage of equipment, especially motor vehicles. In August, German forces at Dieppe were on high alert, having been warned by French double agents that the British were showing interest in the area. They had also detected increased radio traffic and landing craft being concentrated in the southern British coastal ports. The Dieppe landings were planned on 6 beaches, 4 in front of the town itself, and 2 to the eastern and western flanks respectively. From east to west, the beaches were codenamed Yellow, Blue, Red, White, Green and Orange. Number 3 Commando would land on Yellow Beach, the Royal Regiment of Canada on Blue. The main landings would take place on Red and White beaches by the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, the Essex Scottish Regiment, Les Fusiliers Maude Royal, a Commando Royal Marines and the Armour. The South Saskatchewan Regiment and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders of Canada would land on Green Beach, and Number 4 Commando on Orange. Armoured support was provided by the 14th Army Tank Regiment with 58 of the newly introduced Churchill tanks in their first use in combat, to be delivered using the new LCT. The Royal Navy supplied 237 ships and landing craft. However, pre-landing naval gunfire support was limited, consisting of 6 Hunt-class destroyers each with 4 or 6 4-inch guns. They were deployed along the beaches of Dieppe and the neighboring towns, covering all the likely landing places. The city and port were protected by heavy artillery on the main approach. Particularly in the myriad cliff caves and with a reserve at the rear. The initial landings began at 4:50 on August 19th. With attacks on the artillery batteries on the flanks of the main landing area. These were Orange Beach by Number 4 Commando, Green Beach by the South Saskatchewan Regiment, and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders of Canada, and Yellow Beach by Number 3 Commando. The mission for Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater and Number 3 Commando was to conduct 2 landings 8 miles east of Dieppe to silence the coastal battery Goebbels near Berneville. The mission for Lieutenant Colonel Lord Lovat and Number 4 Commando including United States Army Rangers, was to conduct 2 landings 6 miles west of Dieppe to neutralize the coastal battery Hesse at Blankmesnil-Sainte-Marguerite near Varengeville. The landing near Puys by the Royal Regiment of Canada plus 3 platoons from the Black Watch of Canada and an artillery detachment were tasked to neutralize machine gun and artillery batteries protecting this Dieppe beach. On Green Beach at the same time that Number 4 Commando had landed at Orange Beach, the South Saskatchewan Regiment's 1st Battalion was headed towards Pourville. However, on the way in, some of the landing craft had drifted off course and most of the battalion found themselves west of the River Science rather than east of it. One of the objectives of the Dieppe Raid was to discover the importance and performance of a German radar station on the cliff top to the east of the town of Pourville. To achieve this, RAF Flight Sergeant Jack Nissenthal, a radar specialist, was attached to the South Saskatchewan Regiment landing at Green Beach. While the Canadian contingent fought boldly in the face of a determined enemy, it was ultimately circumstances outside their control which sealed their fate. Despite criticism concerning the inexperience of the Canadian brigades, scholars have noted that even seasoned professionals would have been hard-pressed under the deplorable conditions brought about by their superiors. The commanders who planned the raid on Dieppe had not envisaged such losses. This was one of the first attempts by the Western Allies on a German-held port city. As a consequence, planning from the highest ranks in preparation for the raid was minimal. Basic strategic and tactical errors were made which resulted in a higher than expected Allied death rate. The Allies changed their view that capturing a major port was necessary to establish a second front. The damage inflicted on a port to capture it and by the Germans firing demolition charges would make it useless afterwards. The capture of a copy of the Dieppe plan allowed the Germans to analyze the operation. Rundstedt criticized the plan's rigidity, saying that the plan is in German terms not a plan, it is more a position paper or the intended course of an exercise. Other senior German officers were equally unimpressed. General Konrad Hasse considered it incomprehensible that a division was expected to overrun a German regiment that was supported by artillery. The strength of naval and air forces was entirely insufficient to suppress the defenders during the landings. General Adolf Friedrich Kunzen could not understand why the Pourville landings were not reinforced with tanks where they might have succeeded in leaving the beach. The Germans were unimpressed by the Churchill tanks left behind. The armament and armor were compared unfavorably with that used in German and Soviet tanks. The Luftwaffe was pleased with how it had performed during the air battle. The FW-190, which formed the bulk of the air defense, to be in every way suitable as a fighter bomber. It ascribed its good performance despite its marked numerical inferiority to the aggressiveness and better training of the German fighter pilots. The Germans were pleased with their successful defense whilst noting faults in their own communications, transport and location of support forces, but recognized that the Allies were certain to learn some lessons from the operation and set about improving the fixed defenses. Of the nearly 5,000-strong Canadian contingent, 3,367 were killed, wounded or taken prisoner, an exceptional casualty rate of 68%. The 1,000 British commandos lost 247 men. The Royal Navy lost the destroyer Berkeley and 33 landing craft, suffering 550 dead and wounded. The RAF lost 106 aircraft. To others, especially Canadians, it was a major disaster. Of the nearly 5,000 Canadian soldiers, more than 900 were killed and 1,874 taken prisoner.